In a region where war has never been history, women rise not just to defend their nations, but to confront the corrupt systems ruling them. These aren't your typical serial killers on reckless sprees. These women are feared for their power, intellect, and refusal to be silenced. Even when some were serious criminals, others became legends of resilience. But all of them broke the mold of what women were expected to be, and for that, they were feared. 1. Raya and Sakina, Egypt. In the dark alleys of early 20th century Alexandria, whispers of missing women began to spread like wildfire. They weren't just random disappearances. These were women who walked out wearing gold jewelry, carrying cash, and never returned. Most were last seen with two familiar faces, Raya and Sakina, two sisters, smiling, trusted, and quietly operating from within the city's shadows. No one could have imagined that behind their calm appearances lay the cold calculations of Egypt's most notorious female serial killers. It was 1919. Egypt was reeling from the impact of World War I. The economy was in ruins, jobs were scarce, and survival often meant slipping into murky territory. Raya and Sakina's husbands, once employed in the cotton industry, had been cast aside by the country's declining fortunes. And then desperation turned into opportunity. The couples ran brothels, surviving on the backs of women forced into the trade. But even that source of income was beginning to fade. So they came up with something far more sinister. They lured in young, poor girls with promises of work, only to see them as expendable. And when independent women working nearby became a threat to their profits, they decided to eliminate the competition, literally. Together with their husbands and two male accomplices, Raya and Sakina launched a brutal killing spree. One by one, they targeted women, robbed them of their gold and their lives, and buried the bodies under rented houses. The operation was bold, shockingly so. One of the homes they used to hide the corpses sat right next to the El Laban police station. The audacity was terrifying. For months, they operated unnoticed, with Sakina even facing police questioning multiple times. She smiled, she lied, and she walked away clean every single time. But fate caught up with them in November 1920. While workers were installing plumbing under a house Sakina had once rented, they unearthed a decomposed body. Panic set in. Police raided all the properties linked to the sisters. What they found was chilling. 17 women buried beneath the floors of homes scattered across the neighborhood. 17 women who had been erased in silence, now speaking through the evidence left behind. The trial was swift. Raya, Sakina, and their husbands were convicted of the murders. On May 16, 1921, they were sentenced to death. Later that year, in December, the executions were carried out. With the hangings of Raya and Sakina, history was made. They became the first women ever executed by modern Egypt. Their story still haunts Egypt's criminal history, not just because of the brutality of their crimes, but because of how easily trust was weaponized. Two sisters, desperate and deadly, forever etched into infamy as the most feared women to ever walk the streets of Alexandria. 2. Sheikha Latifa bint Mohammed Al Maktoum, UAE. While Raya and Sakina's tale belongs to a bygone era of Alexandria's shadows, the next story unfolds under the blinding lights of luxury, where palaces stand tall in the desert and secrets are buried behind manicured walls. This isn't a tale of blood-soaked crime scenes, but of power, fear, and a royal family's dark undercurrent. In the heart of the UAE, a gilded cage held two women who dared to escape it, the fugitive princesses of Dubai. Sheikha Latifa bint Mohammed Al Maktoum, daughter of Dubai's ruler, was raised amidst royalty. Her life appeared enviable, wealth, privilege, status. But Latifa claimed that behind closed doors, her life was anything but free. From a young age, she witnessed the control, the surveillance, and the consequences of disobedience in a kingdom where appearance was everything. Latifa wasn't the first in her family to seek an escape, but her plan would become one of the most daring the world had ever seen. In 2018, with the help of a French ex-spy and a Finnish martial arts instructor, Latifa plotted her escape. She made it to international waters on a yacht, but the ocean wouldn't deliver her freedom. Just days later, commandos stormed the boat off the coast of India. She was captured and dragged back to Dubai. The story should have ended there, in silence, but it didn't. Months later, a secret video surfaced. In it, Latifa appeared shaken, pale, imprisoned in what she called a villa jail. Her voice trembled as she described being drugged and held against her will. The world listened and watched. Her case cracked open a world of royal repression, but what made it even more shocking was that she wasn't alone. Years earlier, another princess, Sheikha Shamsa, her sister, had also tried to escape. In 2000, Shamsa fled while visiting the UK, but she was tracked down in Cambridge, reportedly abducted by Emirati agents, and vanished back into Dubai. There were no charges and no trial. 2 royal daughters, 2 desperate escapes, and a pattern of control that depicted the palace not as a sanctuary, but a fortress. The backlash was global. Human rights organizations demanded answers. The United Nations called for proof of life. Dubai, in response, staged photographs, stiff, smiling portraits that only deepened the suspicion. The women's expressions didn't show freedom. They showed fear. While Latifa has since made limited public appearances, the shadow over her story remains. Was she ever truly freed, or simply repositioned, still watched, still silenced? 3. Nisreen Mansour al-Forghani, Libya. If the story of the Dubai princesses revealed fear behind palace walls, this next tale takes us deep into war-torn Libya, where a 21-year-old woman became both a weapon and a witness. Her name was Nisreen Mansour al-Forghani, and she wasn't a trained soldier in the beginning. She didn't enlist out of loyalty or belief, but somewhere in the brutal machinery of Muammar Gaddafi's collapsing regime, Nisreen was transformed, or perhaps shattered, into one of the most feared women to walk Libya's war zones. She was just a girl when the bullets began flying in the Libyan civil war, but she didn't run. She didn't hide. Instead, she became part of Gaddafi's notorious all-female militia. Clad in military gear and trained as a sniper, Nisreen wasn't there to wave flags. She was there to kill, and according to allegations, she did just that. 11 rebel prisoners, point blank, executed without hesitation. But when the dust settled and Nisreen was captured, her story changed everything. She claimed she never wanted any of it, that a family friend forced her into the militia, that behind closed doors, Gaddafi's military officials SA'd her, controlled her, made her pull the trigger while a gun was pointed at her own head. For Nisreen, it wasn't about power, it was survival. Every kill, she said, was one more day she could breathe. One more day she wasn't on the other side of the gun. And her escape, it was the stuff of action films. Trapped inside a military compound, she jumped from a second-story window, crashed onto the pavement below, got struck by a passing truck, and still limped away into the chaos. Bruised, bleeding, and hunted but free. Now, out of the military's grasp, Nisreen carries more than physical scars. She carries trauma, rage, and a long list of names. Names of the men who turned her into a killer, and perhaps the terrifying question isn't what she's done, but what she might still be capable of. Because when you've already lost everything, your innocence, your body, your soul, revenge stops being just a motive it becomes a mission. 4. Isra al-Ghomgham, Saudi Arabia. From bullets and bloodshed in Libya to the cold, calculated terror of political suppression in Saudi Arabia, we move now to a woman who never picked up a weapon, yet still terrified one of the most powerful regimes in the Arab world. Her name is Isra al-Ghomgham, and in the eyes of the Saudi state, she didn't need a gun to be dangerous. All she needed was a pen, a protest, and the courage to speak. Isra wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a killer. She was a human rights activist from Qatif, a place that's been the heartbeat of Shia descent in the deeply Sunni kingdom of Saudi Arabia. While most voices there are silenced before they rise, Isra became something rare, a woman documenting injustice as it unfolded. She filmed protests. She posted updates. She chanted in the streets. She raised her voice in a country that teaches women from birth to lower theirs. And for that, the state wanted her head. In August 2018, after being held in prison for nearly 3 years without access to a lawyer, Isra al-Ghomgham was hauled before the specialized criminal court. The charges: filming protests, posting on Facebook, supporting demonstrators, using another woman's photo as her profile picture. The prosecutors didn't claim she was violent. They didn't need to. Under Saudi Arabia's arcane Tazir law, even actions that don't resemble recognizable crimes can lead to the gallows if the judge deems them dangerous enough. And in Isra, they saw danger. The prosecution requested the ultimate punishment: death by beheading. Had it gone through, Isra would have made history as the first female human rights defender executed by the Saudi state. Her name would have become a warning to all other women who dared to speak, but the world was watching. International outcry surged. Human Rights Watch called the sentence monstrous. Amnesty International called it a horrifying message. Activists said it set a precedent that would allow the regime to slaughter peaceful dissenters under the guise of justice. And then, just days before the sentence was to be carried out, the tide shifted. In January 2018, after global pressure reached a boiling point, the Saudi authorities dropped the death penalty request. Isra was spared, but not freed. In 2021, after what advocacy groups described as a show trial, she was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Today, Isra al-Ghomgham remains behind bars. Her crime wasn't murder, it wasn't espionage, it wasn't treason, it was truth-telling, and in a kingdom built on silence that made her one of the most feared women of all. 5. Loujain al-Hathlul, Saudi Arabia. The woman who defied a kingdom. She wasn't just fighting for the right to drive. She was challenging centuries of silence. Born in 1989 and raised in a society where obedience was expected and silence was survival, Loujain al-Hathlul became a storm Saudi Arabia never saw coming. Outspoken, defiant, and fearless, she publicly opposed the kingdom's male guardianship system and dared to drive a car across the border, knowing exactly what it could cost her. She was arrested in 2014, jailed for 73 days, and warned. But that couldn't stop her. In 2018, Loujain was kidnapped from the UAE and forcibly returned to Saudi Arabia. While the world applauded the kingdom for granting women the right to drive, Loujain was locked away in a prison cell, tortured, electrocuted, beaten until her body shook uncontrollably. She was waterboarded. Her thighs were bruised black. One man reportedly laughed as he threatened to kill her and dump her body in the sewage system. His name? Saud al-Qahtani, one of the Crown Prince's closest advisors. They accused her of destabilizing the kingdom. Her crime? Daring to dream of equality. She spent over 1,000 days behind bars, much of it in solitary, often denied calls, visits, and basic human dignity. Even after her release in February 2021, Lujan lives under a 5-year travel ban. But she didn't vanish quietly. Instead, she helped expose global spyware surveillance, including the infamous NSO Group's Pegasus hack, and filed lawsuits against the very men who enabled her kidnapping. Lujan al-Hathlul isn't just a symbol. She is a warning, a revolution in motion. And even behind bars or banned from leaving the country, she still terrifies the regime. 6. Gangsters in war-torn Yemen ensnare women to do their dirty work. In Yemen's war-ravaged streets, where chaos often reigns louder than the law, a new kind of power has emerged. Feminine, formidable, and fearfully misunderstood. These are not the resistance heroines or revolution icons the region might romanticize. No, these women are something else entirely. Caught between conflict, coercion, and survival, they've stepped into roles that blur the lines between victim and villain. And in a place where the collapse of institutions has birthed a vacuum of authority, it is often the unexpected faces that rise to fill the void. In Houthi-controlled territories, a shadowy force of women known as the Zainabiyat enforce fear with religious conviction and military precision. Armed not just with weapons, but ideology, these women are trained to surveil, interrogate, and suppress dissent. They roam classrooms, mosques, and checkpoints, sometimes veiled, sometimes not, but always with the authority to detain anyone accused of disobedience. In a regime that mistrusts even its own, the Zainabiyat are a living, breathing epitome of control. For some, they are a product of radicalization. For others, a survival strategy of the vulnerable. But Yemen's underworld stretches far beyond ideological enforcement. In the port cities where human trafficking thrives in the shadows of collapsing borders, another kind of queenpin has risen. Hoyo Oromo, an older Somali woman with deep connections across the Gulf of Aden, presides over a trafficking ring that turns hope into currency. Her syndicate recruits women and girls, some deceived, some desperate, and funnels them through Yemen, promising passage to Saudi Arabia. But many never make it. Those who do arrive, shattered, sold into servitude or sex work. With her daughter Aisha positioned to inherit the enterprise, Hoyo's legacy is not one of maternal guidance, but of intergenerational exploitation. And then there are those who never meant to be criminals at all. Like Asma Mahboub, a 13-year-old from Aden who answered a knock at her door and stepped into a nightmare. The woman standing outside was someone her family once helped, someone she trusted, but that trust was a weapon. Minutes later, Asma was inside a stranger's house, helping commit a robbery she didn't understand, her hands shaking as drawers were emptied and memories were shattered. Asma's story isn't just about crime, it's about how vulnerability becomes currency in a place where lawlessness feeds on the naive. Even women who push back, who refuse to be defined by war, can find themselves branded criminals. Intisar al-Hamadi, a rising Yemeni actress and model, was arrested by the Houthis in 2021 and sentenced to 5 years on charges of indecency and drug possession. But her real crime was wearing makeup. You heard it right. Speaking her mind and refusing to be invisible was her crime. Her trial was swift, her defense silenced. Behind bars, she became a symbol of how the state weaponizes morality against women who dare to be seen. Asma's fame couldn't protect her, only made her fall more public, more painful. Then there are the women no one names. Women recruited to smuggle weapons, drugs, or money across checkpoints because their bodies are seen as safe, unsearchable, less suspicious. One such woman, unnamed in reports, was caught hiding ammunition in her abaya, her terrified eyes betraying how deeply she'd been manipulated. She had no prior offenses, no known gang ties, just a husband in debt and a child to feed. Like many others, she became a tool in someone else's war, her silence bought with threats and shame. In Yemen, female criminality doesn't wear a single face. It wears veils, makeup, handcuffs, and sometimes a smile that masks exhaustion. These women aren't just criminals. They're the byproduct of a shattered nation where survival often comes at the cost of innocence, and where the line between enforcer and exploited is razor thin. They are feared not because they wield power, but because their very existence challenges the fragile myths about womanhood, war, and agency in the Arab world. 7th, Shajarat al-Dur. Long before the chaos of modern conflicts and the shadowy figures who haunt today's headlines, history holds a name that still echoes power and fear across centuries. Shajarat al-Dur, the Sultana of Egypt. Her name, meaning tree of pearls, belies the ruthless strength beneath, a woman who rose from slavery to sit on a throne in a world overwhelmingly ruled by men. Born in the early 13th century in what is now Turkey, Shajarat al-Dur's journey to power was as extraordinary as it was dangerous. Originally a slave, she captivated Ayyubid Sultan as-Saleh, becoming his favored concubine and eventually his wife. But her greatest coup came not in the palace chambers, but on the battlefield of politics and war. When as-Saleh died, instead of retreating into the shadows as tradition demanded, Shajarat al-Dur concealed his death and took command of Egypt's Muslim forces. It was under her unseen but iron will that the Mamluks, the slave soldiers who would shape Egypt's future, crushed the Crusader armies at the Battle of Mansoura in 1250. This victory wasn't just military. It was a historical pivot that prevented the Crusaders from turning Egypt into a foothold to recapture Jerusalem. Yet power is a double-edged sword, especially for a woman in medieval Islamic society. Expected to cede control, Shajarat al-Dur defied convention by marrying one of her late husband's trusted commanders, the Turkic Mamluk Aybek, who became sultan. She ran the sultanate while Aybek focused on the army, a delicate balance that masked a brewing storm. When Aybek took a second wife, Shajarat al-Dur's fury ignited. Not content to fade quietly, she orchestrated Aybek's murder, a move as brutal as it was calculated. But in the treacherous world of Mamluk politics, no secret stays buried long. Under torture, her conspirators confessed, and the once powerful sultana was imprisoned, only to meet a violent end herself. Shajarat al-Dur's story is a stark reminder. The path to power for Arab women has never been easy or gentle. 8. Ayat al-Kurmezi. In a region where words can be more dangerous than weapons, Ayat al-Kurmezi became a symbol of fear, not because she spilled blood, but because she dared to speak. Born in 1991, Ayat was a young poet and university student in Bahrain, seemingly far removed from the world of thrones, coups, and swords. But when the Arab Spring reached Bahrain's shores, she stepped into the storm, armed with nothing but verse. On a makeshift podium at the now infamous Pearl Roundabout, she recited poetry laced with fire, directly criticizing the Prime Minister and King Hamad bin Isa al-Khalifa. Her lines didn't just demand justice, they tore at the very heart of the monarchy's authority. It was poetry that pierced power. As her verses spread like wildfire across social media, Ayat became an icon for Bahrain's pro-democracy movement and a target. The regime acted swiftly and brutally. Harassment, threats, and surveillance descended on her family. And when she couldn't be found, Bahraini security forces ransacked her home, holding her brothers at gunpoint and vowing to kill them one by one if she didn't turn herself in. Ayat came home, knowing what awaited her. What followed was a descent into darkness, She was abducted by masked agents, beaten en route, and threatened with assault. In detention, she was tortured, confined to a freezing cell, suffocated by gas, struck across the face with electric cables, and forced to clean toilets with her bare hands. Her photos were leaked to pornographic websites. Her confession was forced. On national television, a video aired where Ayat, clearly under duress, renounced her own beliefs and her sect. The regime needed her to be broken, but Ayat did not shatter, even as she was tried in a sham court, denied legal defense, and sentenced to a year in prison for inciting hatred and insulting the royal family. Her courage had already ignited a fire across the Gulf. Her poems had turned her into a revolutionary threat. She was no longer just a student, she was a specter haunting a monarchy, a reminder that a single voice could echo louder than 1,000 bullets. Ayat was eventually released to house arrest, but the threat of rearrest hung over her like a guillotine. Her conviction was never overturned, her freedom never guaranteed. Ayat al-Kurmezi stands in this narrative not as a criminal, but as a woman who terrified a regime with nothing but her tongue and truth. Her story, like that of Shajarat al-Dur centuries before her, shows us that fear isn't always wielded with a blade. Sometimes it comes in the form of a woman who refuses to bow, even when the entire world demands it. These women weren't just feared for picking up weapons or breaking laws. They were feared because they did what no one expected them to. Some ruled, some resisted, and some crossed dark lines. But in a region shaped by war and hunger for power, they made sure their names were remembered. So ask yourself, what really makes a woman dangerous? Is it her crime or her refusal to be controlled? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've made it this far, be sure to check out this next video. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you once again for watching.